Today, where there's a will, there's a relative. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to my latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today I'm joined by Tim Fuller from Nucleus Wealth. Hi Tim.
Hi Martin, how are you going?
Yeah, good to see you back on again. And we've got the last leg of our L series, right? We've had longevity, liquidity, lifestyle, and now legacy. A very important conversation.
Absolutely, Martin. And I think for most people, it's probably not something you're thinking about in your early retirement planning. But remarkably, it does become, into the forte later on. And it's certainly something that you do want to have under control in the event of, and at the final stages. There's a little bit of planning involved. There's certainly a lot to consider. But getting it done right just brings that peace of mind to both, obviously, to yourself, but also brings with it a lot of benefits to your family and the people that are potentially going to inherit your money as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? Because I guess there'll be some people thinking, well, look, I'm not really interested about handing money down the generations and passing it on to the family. It's my life, it's my money, and I'll just, I'll wear it out to the end, right? But I reckon that most people, when they do their planning, do think about family, next generation's legacy. So it actually becomes quite an important conversation. And it's also a very contentious conversation, isn't it?
Look, it is, and Australians, I guess, and I sort of kick off the article for this week, for the final one in the L series, reflecting a little bit on some of the fantastic components of the Australian lifestyle over the last, many decades. We've enjoyed, multiple house booms, huge wage growth, in the early days, the ability for people to really get in and build wealth, which is, puts us as one of the richest countries in the world, which means that more often than not, when people are passing on, they're actually have significant means or significant wealth behind them. And I guess reflecting on that, and there are some numbers around it, they're estimated around $3 trillion is going to be passed on down the generations over the next 10 to 20 years. When you're spending your whole life, working hard, making sacrifices, investing, being cautious with how you're going and building up these sort of assets, don't you think you owe it to yourself to make sure that they are passed on in a correct fashion? And I guess part of the help that can be provided by financial advisors, and obviously there's a number of ancillary services that need to lock in, and we'll chat about those later. Can make sure of that, and make sure that the anxiety of what actually happens after you go, is alleviated, and also that people are prepared to accept large amounts of money, and there's been some planning in place, because more often than not, unfortunately, it does tend to diminish quite quickly, through the subsequent generations. We've got a proverb there.
Yeah, the Chinese proverb. Yeah, I'm not very good on the old Chinese, but what does it mean?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce the Chinese side of it, but the crux of it is that the saying is wealth does not pass more than 3 generations. And another descriptive way of saying it is that the first generation buys the ox, the second generation tends to the ox, and the third generation eats the ox. And so if you've spent the majority of your life developing and collecting a lot of oxen, I think it certainly pays to take a moment to think about how those are going to be handled going forward, both for I guess for your sake and your own and your own beliefs around where it should go, but also because you just want to make sure that all the work and effort that you've put into it actually does benefit your subsequent generations.
Yeah, and you want to shape that in some ways, right, rather than just leaving it to chance or leaving it to something will happen, but we're not sure. In other words, it's worth thinking about, right? And I guess the critical tool for that then is the will, right? That's part of how you think about it, but you've also got to think about the structure as well.
Well, that's right, and obviously the go-to and really the guiding path for everybody is starting with a will and a well-constructed will at that. Wills can take on a number of forms, and as long as they're legal, I guess they can be adhered to. But at the end of the day, the process of putting together a will, whilst it's not going to be the funnest thing you'll do all afternoon, it does mean that you are then setting some guidelines and once again getting some confidence about how the your proceeds are going to be handled. You need to be a little bit careful of, and it's certainly, obviously having a will. We can't stress that enough. And then of course, because otherwise, you run the risk of what's called dying intestate, in which case there's basically laws and guidelines and they're different, slightly different in every state and territory as well, on how it's handled. And the problem there is, of course, you're effectively letting the governance of the day dictate how your assets are split up. And that may not be appropriate at all for your circumstances. You've got to remember when laws are made, they're made with it for a certain scenario in mind. And with most people, particularly if you've had a more colourful life and marriages and all the rest of it that comes into it, that's where it's, I think, incredibly relevant to make sure you've sat down and had a good think about this will process. Because the biggest problem is that at the other end, if there's bickering and fighting and arguments, and I've labelled that section, where there's a will, there's a relative. You want to make sure that you're sealing up, any opportunity for challenges that that you feel are going to cause a lot of mental anguish that in essentially what is a very hard time because you've passed.
And of course, there are also various limits and things you have to be careful of, right? Because otherwise, there are tax bills that suddenly can pop out of nowhere, and all of those things can also be quite a nasty surprise.
Well, that's right. Yeah, and look, that's where it is critical, I guess, and even in the financial planning space. Look, one of the roles of doing a comprehensive plan for somebody is looking at that estate planning side of things, and bringing in the relevant skills and experience to handle that. So looking at the accounting piece, and also looking at things like estate lawyers as well for drafting of wills. And so what it's doing is it's just firming up all the time the outcome at the other side, and once again just discouraging frivolous challenges, I guess, is probably an easy way to put it. The other thing to sort of keep in mind is of course, that there is, typically for most people, you've got sort of your external assets, so it might be house and things that you've held in your own name, and then you've got your superannuation assets on the other side. And so what the will can do is basically set, a firm pathway for your estate assets, and then your superannuation can actually be set in a slightly different way. So it's classed as a non-estate asset, unless, of course, you want to put direct the super directly into your estate and have the will look after it. But what that does then is it means you've got more options, in how that you distribute and ensure the financial, I guess, protections of your loved ones. There's a number of different means, and I do go into them in a little bit more detail in the article itself. But certainly around the tax piece, there are some pretty big tax, I guess, considerations on who gets the money out of things like superannuation, and some terrific strategies to help mitigate that tax if it's done properly. And in particular, of course, we're talking about, as it more often than not happens when people haven't thought about these things, is things like death benefits and superannuation being paid to adult children where tax applies. And there's some wonderful strategies around making sure that you can manage some of that. And it's just through simple planning that it's been thought about, and everything's going to be okay. No one likes, look, paying tax is a fact of life. You don't avoid it, but at the same time you can mitigate it. So.
Yeah, mitigation, of course, is perfectly legal. Avoidance is not. But as you say, be aware of it and structure it appropriately. You can actually minimise the amount you have to pay. There's also another thing about wills, because wills is about assets, but potentially there's also things like a life will, and it can also be things like, how you want your own health to be managed at the point where maybe you're incapable yourself, and that can even take you into things like powers of attorney and those sorts of things too.
Absolutely, that's right. So power of attorney is particularly relevant, and in particular, we had a recent case in our business with a diagnosis of Parkinson's. Now, Parkinson's is one of those diseases where it can take a very long time to sort of sink in, I guess, or really affect the person. But unfortunately, one of those deleterious effects is the loss of mental capacity. So, powers of attorney and enduring powers of attorney set early, of course, because you can't set them afterwards when somebody has lost that mental control. It means that, once again, you've got confidence around the way that the money is spent, and obviously that the person's going to be looked after, and of course whoever's got control of that person's assets is going to be responsible with them, and that's another key component of making sure that there's been a lot of consideration and planning in that.
Yes, absolutely. That's really important. And it's also worth highlighting, of course, that with things like divorce, separation, remarrying, many people have quite complex family relationships, right? So it's not just a simple, oh, well, it'll pass to the spouse and everything's fine. There's often some complexity there too. So, real life, again, impinges, which means that it's really important just to think through some of those things and to lay the foundations. I also noticed that some people also want to leave a legacy to, for example, charities and those sorts of things, right? That's also something else you can include in the will too.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, I think leaving to charity is a wonderful legacy component, if I may. Like it does really come down to the wherewithal of the client, and for people that have been fortunate enough or lucky enough to build up a significant wealth over time, they may actually find that they worry then about leaving a significant amount on their, say, adult children or things like that. May actually have a deleterious effect on their lives. It might be too much. A great problem to have. Hopefully you and I have to worry about that one day, perhaps. But the key thing there is that you can. The key thing there is that there's a number of avenues that you can take for setting up, passing money to a charity. Now, there's different ways that you can do it. It can be, part of the will. You can just say you want to have a direct amount paid to a charity of your choice, or charities of your choice that are meaning for you, and you want to make an impact in that area of the world. You can look at things like trusts as well that can do that, and likewise, there's trusts that you can spin up to pay out to people like grandchildren as well that aren't provided for in the superannuation legislation. So that's another way you can get some confidence that that's where it's going to go. And then finally, there's these private ancillary funds as well, which is sort of, I guess, the top echelon of the charitable world. They've come with a terrific number of tax benefits as well. But what they do then is you can then have your descendants sit on the board essentially of what is a charitable trust. And look, there's rules and regulations. There is some cost in them. We manage money for a couple of them at Nucleus Wealth. So you have to pay out a certain amount every year, and look, I think one of the great things there is that you actually are now involving your younger generations, particularly if you've been quite involved in philanthropic efforts and giving. You can actually then involve them in a big part of that, and obviously they can determine distributions and get a lot of joy out of giving back.
Very interesting. And what you're talking about here is, I can almost see that you've got this constellation of people and entities around the estate, as it were, who are actually potentially helping to construct and manage it into the future, right? So this is actually quite a complicated constellation.
Oh, look, it is, and it's sort of, like everything, if things are hard and need a lot of consideration, they can be put off. But I think at the end of the day, of course, it's very, very worthwhile, and it's sort of something that needs to be factored in. You don't want to get it to the point where it's too late, I guess, and that's where having something in place along the way to just in the event of, and things can happen to people at any time, but also by involving the later generations in there, you're helping to help solve this, eating the ox problem potentially, because they know, in a way, they know what's coming and they can plan for it. And that's often where the problems lie. People that are inexperienced with money, they're at the other end of their financial journey, something in a huge amount of money plopped on them, and with no planning and no prior thought, that's, going to create the opportunity for problems along the way, guaranteed.
Absolutely. Well, it's always said, isn't it, that death and taxes are the two certainties in life, right? And that means that for both those reasons, it's really important to start this thinking and planning early. And the journey we've been on over the last 3 shows and this one, the 4 L's, really are the cornerstones of being able to map out how to actually think about it and to deal with it. But there is, some traps to the unwary. There's a set of processes to go through, and quite often I think people will need to reach for help and assistance to be able to actually structure it right. Get it right, things can work well. If you get it wrong, things can actually go quite bad.
Well, that's exactly it, and the big part of dealing with a professional in any regard is the fact that they've got experience in generally when the things go wrong, and a big part of their role in your life is to ensure that those things don't happen to you. And therefore lies the confidence in getting someone to have a look at it. Now, obviously, the financial planning piece is a crucial cornerstone while you're alive, and also helping you to project what might be left at the end. Accounting to a degree, I guess, as well from those tax considerations, and then the estate lawyer, to sort of tidy it all up. And look, it's, as I said, it's a process. And certainly for mine, and hundreds and thousands of clients that I've spoken to over the years, the estate piece is something that they think about but may not always action because they've got priorities and bits and pieces in their lives that that are taking away from it and just not getting around to it. But it's about highlighting the fact that if you do nothing, it's probably going to be the worst possible solution, and the more that you do, the better everyone else is going to be off, and also the time of your passing shouldn't be one that's filled with having to run numbers and chase around assets and doing all those things. It should be a time to reflect on your life and enjoy that, and then obviously get out the plan or the will and get to work in following that as you've instructed.
Yeah, well, forearmed is forewarned, or forewarned is forearmed, depending on which way around you want to put the quote. But no, that's absolutely right, Tim. And people can go to the Nucleus Wealth website and see all of those 4 articles where you go into a bit more detail. And of course, if anybody wants to follow up and have a conversation, go to Walk the World Fund, and you can therefore from there jump through and find out more about what the services are available and how to think about it. But this is a really, really important conversation, and I want to underscore again, you're almost never too young to start thinking about this stuff. That's just the way things are.
Look, that's right, and I think, once again, it's not a fun topic to sort of have to deal with, but it's an incredibly important topic because in the event of something happening to you, anything can happen if you haven't done, and thought about it and put some plans in place. So change that. Just get in there and have a crack. I can guarantee you'll be all the better for it, and so will your family.
Yeah, good advice, Tim. Well, I appreciate your time on this, and thanks for the content that you've created over the last month or so. Those 4 L's really are important, and I'm sure we'll pick up a conversation on some other angles later, because there are always things to talk about when it comes to financial planning and related items, aren't there?
Oh, look, there's always plenty to talk about, and it's been wonderful to put together this series with you, Martin. And look, I hope I really have added, I think, to both your audience and our audience, in carving out some of the key areas of consideration, and hopefully highlighting some areas that that may need some attention going forward. So always a pleasure, mate.
Thank you very much, and look forward to the next one. See ya.
Absolutely. Cheers.